Recording in progress.
I'd like to welcome all of you to the August edition of Keeping Up with Tech, hosted by the Chicago Computer Society and by me, Sanford. Our co-host is Tim, and everybody else here is an equal participant. So we open up with our open forum, as usual, and then after we've exhausted all the questions, we can go into the topics that I'd sent out to the group. That being said, who'd like to open up the floor with the first question of the evening? Bob wants to tell us about the fact he bought a new phone and how he's handling porting this phone over. Bob? You're muted. Bob, you're muted.
I upgraded.
Okay.
I upgraded from one Moto G stylus, which was a 2020 model, and could not get past Android 7, to a Moto G stylus 2024, which came open box. And I finally got that set up, various things, found the IMEI for the eSIM. And so I have one phone number for the new phone and another phone number for the old phone. Everybody knows my old phone number. I know that call forwarding is pretty straightforward. So I can get calls on the new number that come in on the old, people call the old number, and I can get it on the new phone if I carry that. But SMS messages and two-factor authentication and push notifications, those are things I'd like to push over. And I don't want to have to pay a big, huge subscription to somebody for their app. I have heard of two apps, Join and Tasker. Anybody know about them?
Nope.
I
We'll
use
have to wait till
Motorola
Drew King.
phone, but I've never had to port anything from one phone to another.
Not in the way that I've not needed to do that in a long time. Usually I just port the same number over to the new device and most everything transfers.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I could have done that, but the new phone hadn't been fully set up, so I wasn't sure that I would have everything the way I wanted it. Now that I do have everything the way I want it, I do have two numbers.
And
So,
do you want to keep both numbers?
for the time being, until people learn the new number, until I get everything changed over. There are medical providers you see only once in a while. There are financial things which may take a little while.
Yeah.
And I will discover other things as I go along. And of course, some family members, they'll call once in a while. So if that's as far as we got, I'll have to research these on my own or see if I can contact Drew King about them.
Or Drew, maybe Drew might pop in later on. We can only hope.
Well,
does that mean you have to carry two phones with you everywhere you go?
no. What I want to do is just carry the new phone. Okay. Yeah, I can share my new number with different people.
Okay.
But
Can you forward the old phone to the new phone?
you can do that with calls, but SMS is a lot more difficult.
Okay.
Carriers have put up barriers against doing that. And so you have to use some kind of an app. And the reason why I say Joiner and Tasker is that these appear to be well-established free applications. They're open source. They're not actually free. You pay a one-time fee for each one per phone of $5, just once. And after that, you have all the features. And they claim that they can do that, but setting up Tasker is kind of like dealing with the Windows Task Manager. You have to do a bit of scripting. So that would be a bit of a learning curve. And that's the other reason I want to keep both of them going for a while. So that while I'm learning, Tasker, Tasker.
Okay.
Oh, let me put them in here.
Sounded like you said Casker. Thank you. I got it.
Did you say that the old phone was also a Motorola?
Yeah.
And that doesn't accrue to your advantage, huh? Strange.
And SMS is carrier dependent. It's not phone dependent. So it's that the carriers don't make it easy. It's not impossible. The other thing is when you're dealing with two-factor authentication, it uses Google notifications in Android. And the Google notifications are part of the Google app. And that makes it even more challenging to get those to come over to another phone. But apparently there are ways to do it. Joiner is the one that facilitates getting things from one phone to another. And you could even get it to a computer, I guess. Tasker is a way of automating the process, the way you would with a task manager task. Or the way you would with
Would your phone be connected to Windows, where it's so you can do phone calls and receive SMS as well?
No, because the phone isn't Windows, it's Android.
Yeah, but Windows has connections to Android phones.
Does that mean that if somebody calls the old number, that it'll show up on the new phone?
Yeah, if it's synced to your phone is synced to Windows.
Including SMS?
Yeah, lately my iPhone is doing that.
Okay, iPhone is more difficult actually with Windows than Android. Android
Right.
works better.
Android was doing things first.
Okay, so Windows is a possibility. They do have an app. It's called Windows Phone or Your Phone or whatever they're calling it this week. And yes, they do have a way of doing it.
Yeah, my Motorola phone is synced to Windows, but I think what Bob is asking is then transferring it through Windows to a second phone. That I've never done. Because what that really means is syncing two phones. If it's doable at all, I assume you'd have to sync both phones to Windows.
Right.
It's not hard to try. It's worth a try.
To sync your phone to Windows?
When a text comes in on text or email comes in on my phone, if I'm on the computer, it shows up there as well.
Yeah, it's easy to get it. It's easy to get it from the phone to the computer, but to get it from one phone to another is not easy. And to get it from the computer to another phone, that kind of a relay, you would have to be in constant contact with the computer. And that means you'd have to get into the network.
So how do you get, that brought up a question, how do you get a message from that's sent to your phone to show up in your Windows PC?
There's an app for that.
There's an app for it. What's the app?
It's called Your Phone. It may be called something else now. Windows Phone.
No, it's Your Phone.
Not Windows Phone, but Your Phone.
Your Phone.
And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's kind of flaky.
Phone. Never heard of this one.
Oh yeah, that's on Windows 11. I think it was the same thing on the late Windows 10, but don't quote me on it.
It came into Windows 10 at some point.
Yeah.
It's called Phone Link now.
Phone Link.
Right.
Okay, I'll type that in too.
It lets you sync your Android phone or iPhone to a Windows 10 or 11 PC to send texts, make calls, notifications, access photos directly from your computer.
Yeah. Now with iPhone, it's not as good as under Android. However, just recently, I saw a notification that iPhone, the one thing that a lot of people wanted was copy, cut, and paste to the computer and vice versa. And that may be either working now or will be working sometime in the near future.
I think they're trying to put that into the clipboard as the space that transfers the data.
Yes.
Let's see.
But that was one of the major features that iPhone didn't have, was linking to a Windows PC.
The trouble is, phone link only works with one phone at a time. It will not work with a second phone. So it's a non-starter for what I need to do.
But most people only have one phone.
To be fair, these days, a lot of people do have more than one.
Right. There's a
Yes,
pretty
often
fair
they'll
amount
have a work phone and a personal phone or something like that.
Right.
That's right.
And in some cases, there are phones that have dual SIMs. So you can have one phone and two different lines for different purposes, especially if you're a person who goes traveling out of the country. That second one might be used for international calling.
Yeah, dual SIM, I turned out not to solve the problem. With my carrier, they were not able to do two SIMs that would put both numbers on the same phone.
Yeah,
The existing line, they wouldn't be able to port over if I were getting a new eSIM.
most of the phones are only one SIM, no matter what, but only a small percentage may be set up for dual SIM. And again, this is particularly for people who have to travel a lot outside the country. That way they have communications when they're overseas on one line, and when they're back in the States, they have the regular number.
Yeah, this phone does have dual SIM capability. It can use both a regular SIM and an eSIM interchangeably.
Mm-hmm.
But you do have to switch from one to the other.
Yes.
You can't really share data from one to the other.
Correct.
But it would be all on one phone, and the phone would have two different numbers. However, if you don't have the old number active, if the active number is the new number, it won't ring when calls come into the old number. And it may get the messages because they will queue like anything else. But the calls will all be missed calls. Nevertheless, call forwarding is an option, and I don't know if you can do call forwarding within the same phone device if you have dual SIMs.
Don't know.
That would be an interesting question to ask of my carrier.
Now,
But I think they said you couldn't.
Ken says he's using PhoneLink now, but he's got to be in proximity of his PC. My question is, if you have your Microsoft account on multiple PCs, does that matter? Will it show up on all of them?
Theoretically, if you're syncing, it should.
If you're signed into the Microsoft account and you have multiple machines, and let's say that half of them are turned on at a given point in time, or even all of them, then theoretically you are sharing the phone with all of them if you have all of them set up, or at least the ones that are all turned on. The ones that are turned off aren't going to suddenly turn on.
There you go, Bob. Drew's coming in.
All right.
Give the man a moment to settle down.
Give the man a moment to get his coat off.
Yeah, to get his coat off and
hang his hat.
dog.
And leash the dog.
Hello, Drew. You're muted.
Hello, how are you, everybody?
We are good. And Bob has got questions for you immediately.
I just want to know if you know about apps which are called Tasker, Tasker, and Joiner, Joiner. What I have is a new phone, and I want to push the SMS messages from the old phone to the new phone without great expense for subscriptions.
Oh, there is a program in the Google Play App Store called SMS Backup and Restore. That's what I use when I move from phone to phone. In fact, I use it every night. I have it run every night at midnight, and it backs up my SMS messages and MMS messages to OneDrive. And if I ever lose my phone or lose my messages, I can restore from a backup. And you can also extract messages from the backup. So let's say, for example, here's my example. I entered litigation with a company that I had a chat back and forth with, and I was able to go into SMS Backup and Restore and pull up only that chat conversation and the whole conversation with that company. So that's something that everybody should be aware of. It's called SMS Backup and Restore.
Okay, that's great for that use case. But what I need to do is in real time, I pick up the SMS messages from the old phone number on the new phone.
Oh, is it a different phone number?
Yeah. I got a new eSIM for the new phone, and it is a different number from my old phone because I was transitioning at the time.
Oh, okay.
And everybody knows my old phone number, so they're gonna message and call the old phone for a while.
Well, it's easy to forward the phone number over to your new phone so that when the old phone rings, it automatically rings on the new phone.
For
I don't know if
calls.
that I don't know if that also works for messages.
No, the carriers have rigged it so it doesn't.
But they,
SMS
to be,
messages
to be-
explicitly don't.
to be fair, they did it to protect you
Yeah,
so that nobody could spoof your phone and get your SMS messages on a new number.
that is called SIM swapping, and
Right,
it is a
and
scam.
drain your accounts and stuff like that.
Is your old phone and new phone both linked to a Gmail account?
Yes.
You can go in a web browser. This is not a perfect solution, but if you're in front of your computer, you can go into messages.google.com and log in under the right account, and you'll be able to see all of the messages from your old phone and from your new phone and be able to respond to either one of them.
That's on a computer.
Yes. Well, it also works on your cell phone if you log in with a browser.
Yeah. Just a minute. Google.
You can also, you don't have a Samsung phone, so you don't have secure folders, but
No.
you can load a program. I loaded a program on my phone called Shelter, and Shelter lets you create a work profile. And what the work profile lets you do is have a second installation of apps that do not interact with in any way to the apps on your main screen. So you could install, it creates a Google Play store in there, and then you can install the Google Messages app and link it to a different number so that you can have two copies of Google Messages on your phone, one in your main profile and one in your work profile.
Okay, yeah, that's also a very useful thing to be able to do. But what I was wondering is just how to get the SMS messages over and whether or not you knew anything about Joiner in particular, which is supposed to be able to do this sort of thing, and Tasker, which allows you to make a task out of it. They are both on, I believe it's GitHub, and each one of them costs $5 per device. One time only.
Give me a few minutes to think about it, and I'll give you an answer.
All right. I don't want to put you on the spot.
No, this is a good spot.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Bob. Okay, any next question, new direction? None.
Trying to
How about,
think.
did anybody buy anything new lately?
Well, of course, the
Tech
phone.
related.
Of course, the phone.
Oh, yes.
I've been avoiding buying technology because it's too expensive right now. Luckily, I was looking for a 4 terabyte hard drive, and the one that I was looking at is like $800.
Oh, SSD.
And yeah, and luckily Amazon told me that I bought one of those a few years ago, and I just forgot about it. So I went looking through my computer stuff, and I found the 4 terabyte drive that I bought. The only problem with it is it's USB 3.1 version 1 or chapter 1 or whatever they call it.
Gen 1.
It's not 2. It's not Gen 2, it's Gen 1.
Ooh.
So
Yeah.
it's a slower speed than what I was hoping for, but it's cheaper than buying a new drive.
Can you take it out of that enclosure and put it in another one? A faster
Well,
enclosure?
it's a SanDisk portable drive. I don't know. Does the drive itself have to be generation 2 or 1, or is it the case?
I think it's the case.
Drives themselves are not Gen 1 or Gen 2. It is strictly the interface.
So I need to find out if I can open the SanDisk portable drive.
Be careful though, because sometimes the SSD inside those enclosures in the pre-built ones is keyed to the controller of the enclosure, so that its internal organization depends upon that controller.
Yeah,
Especially if they're using multiple drives in there and running them, stacked or something like that. That maybe they were two terabyte drives that they made into a 4 terabyte.
Many of those portable drives like that are SSD, they're really not made to open up at all. So if there's a warranty on the drive, you just void it.
Right.
And you're on your own.
Drew, I would look up a YouTube video on that drive and see if anyone's opened one up.
Oh yeah. I'm not going to really think I'm going to bother with it. I think I'm just going to leave it the way it is.
Okay. This is good conversation, though. I've done this to multiple hard drives, spinning drives in the past, where I used to buy spinning drives like at Costco or something, take them out of the enclosures and put them in a box.
Yes, but that ideology died years ago for the most part. And generally speaking, these SSD type drives are all in one. There's only one interface on it, and that's the USB. There is no SATA connectivity or M.2 connectivity built into the internals.
Yeah, internally it may not even have the M.2 connections.
Right.
Yeah, it's not worth pulling it apart to find out.
Well, to me, it would be.
Well, it's
well, you want to reimburse me?
I'd do it just for the fun of it, to see what happens.
If I try it and it fails, Sanford, will you buy me a new $800 drive?
No, but I'd have fun playing with it.
I mean, if it's out of warranty, if you want to, you can do a crapshoot and see if you come up snake eyes or you're a winner.
Yeah, essentially, if you bought it years ago, it's probably out of warranty already, whether or not you used it.
That's a possibility, but some do carry warranties of 3 to 5 years.
Correct. I go the other direction. I buy enclosures and I put M.2 or SATA SSDs inside of them.
That's correct.
And that way I can swap and trade anything I want.
That's correct.
And some of these enclosures are Thunderbolt, which is quite fast. And some of them are USB 3 Gen 2. Some of them are USB 3 Gen 1, which is fast enough for Linux.
Mm-hmm. It depends on what you're doing. And you have to think about how you do things with your computers before you buy a drive. If you, I have two Samsung drives similar to what we're talking about here, and both of them are USB only. You can't use them anywhere else other than a USB port. And you can take a USB 3 or 3.1 Gen 1 and plug it in to a USB Gen 2 port. But some are called 3.1 Gen 2, and the newer ones are called 3.2 Gen 2. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
And you won't get the max performance, but you will get an improved transfer rate performance on that older technology.
Yeah. USB 3.2 Gen 2 has really good speed, more than you really need for most purposes, unless you're gaming.
Yeah.
Or unless you have huge data transfers going on all the time. So USB 3, what they used to call 3.1, which is now 3.2 Gen 1, that is perfectly adequate. The 3.0, which is 3.1 Gen 1, 3.1 Gen 1, is a bit slower. I have a USB-A port on my Framework laptop that operates at about that speed.
Okay.
The USB-C ports are much faster.
Oh, and Bob, just one question going back to the previous topic. Is your old phone number still active for a short period of time?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
So can you add that SIM to your new phone?
My carrier says that if I did that, I could not in real time get the SMS messages
Right, because
from the old number, because I would have to switch from one SIM to another within the phone in order to use the other one. So the SMS would be delayed.
Yeah, that would I once after a hurricane, I went to AT&T and bought a eSIM for a month.
Right.
And I had Verizon and AT&T at the same time, but I could only connect to one network at the same time at one time. So I could only get text messaging from one or the other. But that way you don't have to carry two phones with you, and you can check your messaging if you want to.
Yeah, I could check the SMS after the fact. That doesn't help much with 2FA though.
Well, it would if let's say you're in front of your computer and you need to enter a two-factor code. Tap for 5 minutes, switch to your old phone number.
Oh, yeah, that could be done. It'll be a bit awkward, but it could be done.
I mean, that's one way of doing it. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's the best I can think of on short notice.
Yeah, the trouble is some of this 2FA has to do with apps that are on the phone when I'm away from a computer.
Is it an authenticator app?
No, Google itself, the Google app on an Android phone, is able to send its own notifications that are outside of SMS. Or 2FA sometimes still travels by SMS. So there are two different kinds of 2FA that are active on a phone.
If you're like, I have a bank that only supports text messaging, they don't support an authenticator app. So I have no choice but to do it the way that I am recommending to you. Unless you log into the bank and change your phone number.
Yeah, eventually I do want to get all these numbers changed. But that's going to take a little time.
Yeah. The only thing I can think of is to have that would give you not real time, but near real time is to do it that way. With two SIMs in the same phone.
The time that it would take to switch back and forth would not be longer than the length of time that the 2FA number or code would still be valid, so that would work.
It It takes about 60 seconds, and you can do that before you enter your user ID and password.
Yes, that's a possibility. It
It only takes about 30 seconds to switch accounts.
If I had a SIM containing, the SIM from the old phone, I was told I could not directly place into the new phone because there'd be configuration issues.
So what you need to do is, a lot of phones will handle 2 eSIMs. Contact your old carrier and find out if you can convert your old physical SIM into an eSIM.
No, this one supports one eSIM and one physical SIM. Nothing more.
Oh, you can't have two eSIMs.
No, not in this phone.
So
that would have been easy.
That solution won't work then.
That would have been too easy. Yeah.
How about Velcro taping the two together?
Yeah, that might work. Or get a giant phone case. Get one of these bricks like we used to carry.
Or you keep one attached to your belt on the left side and one on the right side.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be an engineer then.
Just make sure you fall on the side that has the old phone, not the new one.
Who's the new and old carrier?
They're both US Mobile. And they're both exactly the same plan. It's just different numbers.
Right. Because you can get a new phone sometimes when you switch phone numbers.
Oh, no, you don't get a phone with your plan from US Mobile unless you pay a lot more than I'm paying. I am paying third tier. Thank you, Sanford.
You're welcome.
I am paying third tier prices. But I'm just wondering, I'm just trying to find out if there's anybody who knows how Joiner and Tasker work and how they would work together. And there may be some people who can figure it all out. I may be able to figure it out, and maybe by next month I'll have a report on it.
Right.
Right now,
I don't know if the individual I gave you that information for has experience with those apps, but that person usually knows more about cell phones and multiple numbers and dealing with porting stuff over. So leave it at that. Okay, it's the best resource I could give
that's
you.
a good resource. That's a good resource.
Okay.
I think what I'm going to do is just start doing some experimenting cautiously so I don't ruin anything, and see whether I can understand how these apps work. Maybe watch some videos before I do anything, and take quite a few notes. And by the time I have my notes, I'll probably have a stepwise solution. Might even have it by next month. This month I've had some medical stuff, so I had some delays. Otherwise, I might have it already. But if I do come up with anything, I'll let everybody know.
Please do it the next meeting.
Whatever progress I have made, I will report.
Great. Love this.
Or lack thereof.
Okay, since we're still in open forum, I'd like to know if anyone else has any questions for the group. Jim, do you have anything for us? Or Joe or Drew?
No.
The only thing I have that I'm working on right now, my most current thing, is I'm writing a keyboard macro for Zoom meetings. Sometimes when I'm a co-host, I get tasked with the responsibility of hitting the admit button over and over and over again, and as people enter the waiting room. So I found out that the keyboard macro app that I use has the ability to scan the screen and look for buttons and to press. So ChatGPT is helping me write a macro that when I'm done with it by this next few days, I'm hoping on Sunday, when I do a general meeting on Sunday, I'll have the macro ready so that when, at any time, as soon as they pop up on the screen, it'll left click the button
A macro app. What's the
It's
app
a
you're
keyboard.
using to do this?
It's a keyboard macro software called Auto Hotkey.
I've heard of
Auto
it.
what? Auto hotkey.
Auto Hotkey. All one word.
I've heard of that one.
And you can have it do all kinds of things. Like, for example, I have it set up to auto type. So, like, my email address is kingdrew@kingconsulting.us. If I type in at KD in an email or in a notepad or a Word document or wherever, it automatically replaces it with my email address.
That's pretty interesting. I used to do it macros a lot when I was doing a lot of data processing, but decades ago, and I mean multiple decades ago, the solution for my problem was Dell at the time came out with a keyboard that you could program, a programmable, you could program macros right into the keyboard. And just by hitting a key combination, it would invoke the macro. It made it really easy. Of course, it didn't work with mouse clicks, but it did work with the keyboard. But that's an old PS1 style plug, if you remember those. Very old technology, and I was sad to see it go. And I hated losing that keyboard because it really saved my butt when I was doing a lot of data processing and repetitive work over and over and over.
Sanford, there are programmable keyboards even today. They do exist.
They do. I see. I'm a bit out of the loop of this. I haven't needed this in a long time, but I don't know why all keyboards don't have something like that you could program it.
It costs a little more. And what happens is if you program a keyboard to use your chosen macros, that will conflict with applications and operating systems and browsers,
Right.
which have already pre-designated macros or shortcuts. And so you have to make sure your macros are longer than a shortcut.
Yeah,
Well, the
and a lot
keyboards
of situations you don't have to have a separate app. Quite often, the operating systems contain the ability to be able to make keyboard shortcuts of your own. But again, it's your responsibility to know all the keyboard shortcuts and anything and everything you keep running, so that when you create a new one, you have to use one that is unique, that will not conflict with any of the programs you might be running at the time.
Does Windows have built-in macro capabilities by default?
I know Linux does, but Windows, yes,
Yeah.
it does.
How do you bring it up? How do you bring up this dialogue to do a macro?
I haven't touched that in so long, it's not even funny. It's been a long
Okay.
time. It is in there. I know that for a fact. It's in the settings area, I believe, if I remember right. You have to go into settings and system, I think it is. And but if you want to check when you go into settings of Windows, up at the top left side, you have a search box. Try keyboard shortcuts.
Yeah, auto hotkey is strongly recommended even by the AI.
Yeah, that's normal. A lot of things are done with apps these days, but a lot of people have no clue about the software they already have and are running on their computers to begin with. And a lot of the features that they are using separate apps for, that they may have a subscription to,
Yeah.
they end up bypassing what's free already in their system. That's the only way I can put it. Is most people just do not look around first at what they have. What can I use? In Excel, Microsoft Office, you go into those two apps. Believe me, you can create any shortcut you want to under the friggin' sun, as long as it doesn't conflict with an existing shortcut within the application. If you are using Yahoo or Google's calendar function, you got probably shortcut keys there as well within the app. So I guarantee you, you also have them in the operating systems in almost all instances to be able to control things outside of your existing apps. But you have varying numbers of apps running at any given time, depending on what you do on your computers on a daily basis. And you have to make certain any keyboard shortcut you make with the OS has no conflict with any of possible running apps you use on a daily basis. That's the key. Because otherwise, you may have the running app going and it says, oh, I know what that key combination is. I'll use it for my own purposes.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Drew.
Yeah, and I also I also just found an app on the Google Play App Store called SMS Forwarder.
Mm-hmm.
That might work for you.
SMS Forwarder.
I'm checking to see whether there are any hidden fees in it. Yeah, it's a freemium. I looked at it before. It's freemium. If you want any of the really nice features, you have to pay a subscription.
How much is
And
that?
then I sent you a second one called Join, and that one has a free 30-day trial.
A Joiner probably does
Not
something very
not
similar.
Joiner. It's just
I've
called
looked at
Join.
Join. I've looked at Join. I've looked at Join, and again, it's a freemium model. If you don't mind paying a subscription, you can do a lot of things.
But it's free for 30 days.
Yep. There's a lot of them that are free for 30 days. Why?
And it's only
are
$5.
you- Drew,
It's only $5 after that, so it's not a big deal.
$5 for what period of time?
Mm,
Is that lifetime? Is that lifetime, or is it per how long?
about the app? It is a 30-day trial and a one-time $4.99 payment to unlock the app.
There you go.
Oh, you know what? I think that Join is the same as Joiner. It's just Joiner is the name that it has on GitHub.
It could be true.
Or maybe I got the name wrong. It's Join. Yeah, and that's the one that I want to learn how to use. Now, Join has a connection with Tasker, in that Tasker automates various scripts that tell Join what actions to do. So
then,
if you want to automatically forward certain SMS messages and certain other things, you can write a little script.
Well, if you're into writing scripts, there is a program that I use for a couple of purposes called MacroDroid. That's in the Google Play App Store also. And MacroDroid lets you create macros to do multiple things on your phone. And
Okay.
you could have it be triggered by an incoming message. Trying to think. If
So
you
could
could
essentially write a macro to do this and not have to pay anything.
you know what I would do is I would write a macro to either forward it from the old phone to the new phone or create an email address. Your new phone number and your old phone number both have an email address associated with them. And
yeah, but it's the same email address. It's the same email address.
Well, no, the email address is based on your phone number. So, like for example, Verizon uses a web domain called vtext. So my old phone would be 941.123.4567 at vtext.com, and my new one would be 9876 at vtext.com.
Are these existing accounts, or are they something you have to create?
They already exist. There's
Not on
I
my
was
phones.
on another Zoom meeting where somebody gave me the name of a website that you can go to and look up your phone number, and it will tell you what the email address is for your phone number.
Yeah, but that does absolutely nothing for SMS. SMS is completely different from email.
Let me think about it while we're discussing other things.
Drew's good at
That's the trouble.
multitasking.
SMS is just this interesting little world of its own. But yes, join may be the correct name of the app. Thank you for that.
Next question, new direction. Wayne, do you have anything for us? Can't hear you, Wayne. There you go.
Sorry, I just got back from another meeting, so
Your mind is somewhere else.
pardon?
Your mind is somewhere else.
Right.
Okay. If anyone is interested, this is a totally new direction here. And not necessarily, this is not related to CCS, but just as a footnote of information. I just came back from an experience in Iowa. I participated in a bike trek across the state. I was not the person riding the bike. I was the person being a support vehicle. This event is called RAGBRAI, RAGBRAI, and it's roughly a 400 to 500 mile bike trek that goes across the state. The reason I bring it up is when I became involved in this as a support driver, I was given an access to a couple of apps that they provided. RAGBRAI gives you an app, and they also give you another app that's called Ride with GPS. And what these do is they work hand in hand. The bike riders would have this app on their phone, Ride with GPS, and the routes would be given to them by RAGBRAI. It would show their entire route, how much climb they would have to do, how long it should take them to get there, what their destinations were, complete GPS routing, as well as it would give them access to any emergency information that they needed. If they needed to if they fell and needed help, it would respond to them and give them access to the emergency vehicles that were part of this event. I, as a support driver, was given totally different routes than the bike riders were. And every day I was given the route of where I needed to start, where I needed to be in the middle, and where I was at the end. And it's all GPS driven, kind of like Google Maps, if you will. But it was specifically using this Ride with GPS, which I've never used before. They would also pump or push a lot of information to you throughout the day. They would let you know what vendors were going to be at your stops. The bike riders would know as they're going to a particular location, this is the vendors that are going to be there, this is the food possibilities, how long they're going to be there for, the vendors will be there, and any other assistance they may need as they're doing the bike ride across the state. So they would get this fed to them throughout the day. It was probably the most organized event that I've ever been to. About 30,000 people participate in this. That is 30,000 people moving every day, location to location, location across the state, including porta potties, buses, everything. And majority of the people that participate in this event are tenters. They are not people that stay in hotels or RVers. So there's a lot of logistics that go on this event, and I would encourage anybody to go look it up and see what it's all about. You can go on YouTube and see the videos. Whether or not you're a bike rider doesn't matter. I just thought this event was phenomenally coordinated, just unbelievable. And I'll throw that back to the group if you want to get more information, look it up, or you can ask me anything, but I don't know a lot. And that was RAGBRAI in Iowa, across the state of Iowa. Happens every year. I think this is the 52nd year that it's been going on. Has anyone heard of this event? No. Well, none of us are.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Ken has heard of it. Good. We did have people, I remember there was another gentleman who used to be in our group that was a bike rider. He hasn't, Bob Cross. He probably would have known about this thing, but I would encourage you to take a look into it. It's not necessarily CCS related, but it was a pretty neat event that I got to participate in.
Yeah, I've done Bike to Drive. In fact, I think I'm either one of 17 people that have done it 15 or more times, or 15 people that have done it more than 17 times, which is probably more correct. Yeah. And I've also done something called the Tri-State Tour, where you leave from Hammond, Indiana, and you end up in Kenosha. And that's a one-day event.
Hammond to Kenosha. What is that, about a 70-mile ride?
Actually, it was 80, and then there was a loop around the park, and I was going to make it 100, but then there was some big event going on in the park side of backtrack, so it was 96. But
okay. It's still a lot of miles you put on.
Yes, yeah.
So RAGBRAI is anywhere from 40 to 100 miles a day, depending, and it depends on whether there's a lot of elevation changes or not, and what routes. And that's what I had to say. Give you a quick report on what I was doing last month as I was traveling across the state. Questions? None. Shall we go into the topics I sent out to the group? So the first thing that I brought up as our topic, here, let me share my screen, is digital organization. I thought we'd discuss about how we organize our digital lives, if you will. That is, do you have a logic that you use when you're organizing, let's say, your photos, or managing your backups, let alone passwords and things like that, and removing duplicates? But I was curious about what people are doing to organize their PCs on a daily basis. Anyone like to expand on this?
Organizing PCs?
Well, how do you organize hierarchically? How do you organize your PC? That is, besides what Windows does by default, how do you manage it differently?
Oh.
Yeah. Document
well,
folders.
one thing I do is I pin frequently used folders to Explorer.
Okay.
So, for example, I have Windows Subsystem for Linux installed, and every time I load a new app, it adds an app icon to the group, only it's under the letter U for Ubuntu. And so in File, I learned through ChatGPT how to pin an app folder like Ubuntu 2204 to the file manager. So when I click on it, it opens up all of the apps that are in there, and I can just click on one and run it.
Is this something you could quickly illustrate? How to pin something in Explorer?
Yeah. You want to see if I can share the screen. Hit share. More. Hide floating video panel. Hide floating meeting controls. So inside, you can see right here, in my profile, Drew King, app data, roaming, Microsoft Windows, start menu, programs, Mint 22.2, is where I have this pinned to my start menu. So if I go up to here, you can see all these items that are pinned. And if I click on Ubuntu 24, it shows me all of the apps that I have in Ubuntu 24.04. If I click on Mint 22, it shows me all of the icons that are in the Mint folder. So if I bring up my start manager, my menu, start menu, if you want to get to something that's down at the letter U, you have to scroll all the way down to U every time you want to run one app.
No.
This gives you once you create that pinned folder, you can then pin them to the start menu. So, for example, right now this is the top of my start menu, and if you look, I have Ubuntu 22.04 shortcut. You can pin shortcuts to the start menu. So if I click here, it automatically opens up a new file manager with those icons in it. So that's one way of organizing. If you're on your start menu, you
How
have
did
a
you
lot
create
of.
that pin again?
You go into here. You go into app data, roaming, Microsoft Windows, start menu, programs on your profile, and then here are all of your. Here's my Mint 22.2 that I copied to. I copied it to that folder, and then you just click on Pin to quick access.
There it is.
I do a lot of work with virtual machines also, and what I do is I have a pCloud account, and this is only valid for people that have a pCloud account. They support WebDAV, which is built into Windows. So when I create a new virtual machine, I download all my downloads to pCloud. I don't download them to the download folder on my PC, because that way I can switch to another PC or a virtual machine and get to all my downloads. So for that's another way I organized my life is I keep things that I want to have on multiple computers and virtual machines in the cloud, so that I can spin up a virtual machine, and within under a minute, I can mount the WebDAV, the pCloud drive, and get to my shared files that I use in different, that I want to have available to me.
Offhand, I have one thing I would like to correct Drew on. I'm going to share my desktop. Okay, now I bring up the start button. Most see view category, and if you click the down arrow key, you can do a grid or a list. And I do a list just like Drew did. However, a feature going all the way back to Windows 10, I forget where in 10 it started. Take any of these alphabetic characters, click on it, you get a directory kind of thing. What you want's in W, go straight to W's. That's that easy.
I know about that. I just rather have it on the start menu.
Well, I understand that, but a lot of people don't know this feature even exists back in 10.
Right.
And I have to educate people from time to time on this particular feature, because otherwise they'll do just the dumb scrolling like this every time that they're trying to find something. If they know what the first letter of that name is, click, select, I'm there.
Thank you, Tim.
Also, you have the new search bar at the top of the start menu where you can type something in and jump right to it.
Yep.
Like if you type W, it'll just show you the W items.
Right. That's an alternate way of doing it too. Any app that you want, you can type into the search bar, and usually you only need about, at most, the first 3 letters, and odds are it will find the exact one you're looking for, and you can say, I can open it up with administrator, and maybe do additional things with it.
Another alternative is using the taskbar to set up a folder access that way.
So my
Yeah.
question more to the group is, how do you organize your data? That is, now we're not talking about the data you get from a particular program. If you have a lot of data that you've been accumulating over the years, files, that is, pictures, JPEGs, or documents, like I scan all my documents, so I created a hierarchical system for storing all my documents, if you will. That is, all the bills, everything that comes in gets scanned and put into a document and stored. So this way I'm
Right.
eliminating all the paper. It's what is the technique that the attendees here in this group are using? What system have you put in place?
Everything that you just mentioned, I keep in the cloud so that it's
Okay.
not on my PC, so that I can get to it from any computer or phone.
Okay, so but what kind of hierarchical system have you designed for yourself to use?
Under documents, I have a folder called 5811 Helicon, which is my house address, and anything related to my house, bills, insurance payments, things like that, all go in that folder. I'm not one of those people that creates subfolders for January, February, March, April, May, June, July, like some people do. But my main thing is I organize them as best I can in the cloud.
By subject, if you will.
Yes.
Okay, so your subject would be your home, whatever.
So I have a folder called receipts.
Okay.
And if I go shopping someplace and I buy something that's more than $10 or $20 or something that I may need to return or find out about, I scan the receipt and my phone automatically uploads it to the cloud so that I have my receipts in a receipts folder.
Okay. And then do you organize that by year?
I do it by store, and underneath store, the file name automatically has today's date, the current date and time in it. So if I go to Costco and I buy something expensive, I have under receipts, I have a folder called Costco, and then under there, I might put TV and the date.
Okay. I like that. I will add just a small little thing on the Costco end is you have a Costco account. You probably have or created an online Costco presence. You can look up every transaction you've ever done at Costco. They'll be in there.
Okay. That was just an example that
I know.
picked out of my head.
I'm just putting that footnote in on Costco. No one else is as organized as they are.
Walmart has that as well.
Okay.
I have my credit card set up to automatically, when I go to the Walmart register to check out, instead of printing a receipt, it forwards it to a text message to my phone, which I can then tap on, and it launches the Walmart app and brings me right to the receipts.
Okay.
Does anyone else have their technique that they'd like to share on how they're organizing their massive amount of data that they're accumulating? No. I guess, Drew, you and I are the only two that are organized in this group, and the rest of them are all garbage cans.
Or they're so proprietary they can't share them.
Harry?
No, I pretty much do it a kind of a hybrid of the two of you. By topic, I have things from my condo in one section, legal stuff with my attorney in the next one, and so on, all alphabetic, but I'm talking about the folder names. But because I do weekly backups, I put the date of the last time I put anything into that folder. So the condo materials says 07/25/26. So I know that the last time I put anything into that directory was July 25th of 26. It's probably overkill, but it just allows me to look. It's one column, 1.5 screens in length. So it's not that much. Same thing with photos. Who are the kids? We have not that many kids, but we have a lot of grandchildren. So we end up with a lot of photos. And it gets impossible to remember when was the last time I updated the photos. So the dates, even though it's overkill, because Windows will put the date on anyway, but in the title of the folder, I have the dates. I know the last time that I updated anything within.
Okay. Thank you, Harry. Anyone else want to share their technique that they're using for hierarchical storage?
I'm sorry. One more thing. I think some of you know that I'm a little crazy with backups. I have a 5 backup drive system. Every Sunday, the 2 that are connected to my computer all the time, I supplement with 3 that I do the backups on to match the 2 that are active, disconnect them, and twice a year, 3 times a year, I take one of them when I go to visit my son, bring it to his house, take back the one I left the previous visit. So while there's 5, I guess you could say there's 6. Because
well, you keep one off site, which is a smart thing to do.
Well, it's a little excessive, and
no.
I don't know that normal people need to have 5 copies.
You know, whether it's 5, 3, 2, it doesn't matter. You're doing, this is what you set up. And this is not a judgment on whose system is right or wrong. It's what we're doing. I do a similar thing where I have an offsite drive that I have at my daughter's house, and she brings it to me every so many months, and I back it up and I give it back to them and they put it away. That I found beneficial. But that's for the overall backup routines. I was still exploring the hierarchical technique that people are using for their accumulation of data. Maybe we're the oddballs, Drew and I, and maybe Harry are the oddballs where we're accumulating data on a monthly, if not daily basis, and organizing it is key because, like I said earlier, I scan all my documents that come in, everything that comes in, whether it's via email or, printed receipts or something. It all goes into folders because I found that it worked for me to get rid of all the paperwork, and it's easily sortable, and I can go back and pull this stuff up at any moment's notice. And
yeah,
documents are all just PDFs.
Right. And just one thing to add is I keep everything encrypted on the cloud. So if things that are related to my personal finances, what I paid for my roof, things like that, the cloud provider can't read.
Ken?
I was just going to say for files and then some folders as well, prepend the date in the format 2026-08-06, kind of from my database background. Sometimes you can put underscores in there, but I would do that with directories or more specifically files. So if I have a credit card receipt or something, I'll put that, and then I'll put what or like an Amazon order, and then I'll put it, I'll prepend that, and then I'll put the some information of what's in the file, and then that way, if I have to go back and look it up, it's pretty easy to find.
Mm-hmm.
And I have hundreds of directories of that I do that with for my video editing. So
Okay.
they all start with the date like that.
And see, and you're on the right direction, because once you start this realm of, working with large files and a lot of files, you got to create some type of organization to this, because you'll lose them. You don't know where you're going to put them, and you're working on one. You can't leave them all on your desktop, and you can't leave them all in documents or photos, whichever. You can't leave them all in one place. You got to break it up somewhere so you could be able to access and find these things. As I said about documents, I've created a template that I use every year, and then I create a master folder based off of the year. And then underneath that is the sub-document categories, like Drew was saying, your house, your car, medical expenses, medical bills, whatever technique you want to put in. But I maintained a consistency across the years so that I could be able to go back and say, okay, I need to find a medical bill from such and such a year. Or I don't know what year it is, but it's a medical bill. So I could go through all the medical bills based off of years and be able to find it.
Oh, here's another thing you might like, Sanford.
Yes.
There's a free program called Recall, RECOLL, that is an indexing program, and it can index the contents of files, and it can do that whether they're on your PC or in the cloud.
Okay.
It's a lot more thorough than the Windows indexing in terms of being able to index anywhere, external hard drives, cloud drives, and if you go in, let's say you purchased a General Electric refrigerator 10 years ago, you can type in General Electric, and it will find the document that has General Electric in it somewhere.
I like that. It's called Recall, RECALL.
OLL. OLL.
Yeah, don't get into the Microsoft product.
Recall. OLL.
Like recollect.
Okay, I'm going to have to give that one a look-see.
And if you run it on Windows, here's the catch. On Windows, the application is single-threaded, and it's a lot slower than it is on Linux. So I actually run under Windows subsystem for Linux. I run the recall under there because I've done a comparison where I take my cloud drive and I have recall running on Windows and recall running in Linux. And I tell it to index all my documents. It takes Linux a fraction of the time for Windows. But if you're indexing a large amount of stuff, you set it up to index before you go to bed at night. When you wake up in the morning, it's all done. And then adding new documents is just an incremental add, so it's not that big a deal. So using the Windows version is not terrible. It also indexes Thunderbird for people that use Thunderbird email. You can instantaneously recall any message that you've ever received, including files that are attachments to your emails.
Thank you, Drew. Harry, yes.
Just a quick add-on to my comments before, that I essentially, mine is somewhat primitive. It's almost analog rather than digital, that I've got about 24 folders, and in some cases the subdirectories go 5 or 6 levels deep. Some people don't like that, I totally get it. But for example, my wife has websites. She's a jewelry designer, and there are times I want to go back and see something that I did, a graphic that I did for that website 5 years ago, that maybe I can make an adjustment and use it for a website now, different purpose and that kind of thing. So I keep all the originals, not things she never used, but anything she used where I took the photograph and did, editing of it and so on. And to keep all of that straight sometimes needs as much as 4 or 5 generations deep. So it gets a little bit complicated, but you said before, if you do it regularly, you know that's how it's organized. So I may not remember the file name, but I'll know that it was for my wife's crocheting website. So I'm going there, and it may take me 20 seconds to figure out which subdirectory has what I want. So I think it's partly what you're saying, being organized, but I think it's also the consistency that you alluded to a moment ago, that if you always do it the same way, it becomes part of your way of thinking about it.
Correct. And that's kind of it, because, you know, as I said, we're dealing with, some of us are dealing with large data sets that accumulate over time, and you need a way to organize it. And that's the reason for this discussion. Photography, those of you may or may not remember, I used to run the digital imagery SIG for the club, and I've accumulated probably upwards of 20,000 photos. That's a lot of photos to keep track of. And I had to create a system to manage those photos, similar to what I've done on documents. I do it by year, and then I do it by categories. And then I plug them all in there. I don't bother renaming photos.
What about the categories first and years within the categories?
Right. Whichever technique you use, there's no wrong way of doing this. It's just whatever you establish. And that's what
I'm
encourages.
Any kind of program to go through your photos and videos that can pick out similar ones and by date to help organize them? Because I have folders that have thousands of photos in it myself, and I wanted to organize them.
You're asking, do I have one?
Well, do you use one? Are you aware of any?
I use Google Photos to organize my photos. It categorizes them automatically by year. You can search for people's names. You can search for similar faces. You can search by title, like dog or owl, and it'll find all the pictures that have dogs in them.
Is it searching the content of the photo?
Yeah.
And it recognizes dog and app?
Yeah.
Now
like
that's online.
I once went to a dog park and I took a photograph of an owl up in a tree, and the photo is just a number, of combination of numbers and letters or whatever my phone uses. And if I want to show somebody a picture of that owl, I go into Google Photos and I just search for the word owl, and it brings up the pictures that happen to have an owl in them.
That's pretty good. I don't, Ken, you were asking, do I have one? I don't personally have one that I use on a local basis. Drew showed us about the one that he's using. I don't, this is part of the reason for the discussion. Maybe somebody has a better thought on how to do it on a local system. Any particular software to use for it. I know Apple Macs are well suited for this type of function, where you can search through metadata and things like that. But I don't know about PC software.
I've seen it advertised on certain NAS systems have that capability, and so I was kind of wanting to upgrade my storage. Right now, I'm using a PC I built a fair amount of time ago. I have 6 hard drives, and anyway, lots of storage. But I was thinking of upgrading to a different system. Just for one reason, it's just I don't age out my system because I already can't upgrade it. So software-wise,
But if it's still working,
it still works.
okay. Yep. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. I'm still running an old server that should have been decommissioned a decade ago, but it's still working and it works for me. So,
yep. But I can't upgrade any of the software I need to upgrade, which is why I need to perhaps move to different storage and keep this one as editing with software that I have for some videos, and then the new stuff move on to a different computer and
I
use
do
the
know
NAS.
that Adobe offered, along with their Photoshop elements, they have an indexing program, an organizer. But the caveat of using the Adobe products is they want to take control and move all your data from the system you had set up to its own system
Yeah,
that it's going to create. And I wasn't comfortable with going with that route. I don't like anyone taking control. I just want them to look for it.
Yep.
So that's what I ran into on many of the applications that do this. I've just not found one to do what Ken, you're referring to that you want to do, is to just do a metadata indexing of all your photos and scan them like Drew was indicating. Boy, that'd be great on a PC level.
Has anybody heard of a program called DigiKam? DIGIKAM? According to ChatGPT, it's the best overall free photo organizer. It works on, it's open source, runs on Windows, Linux, and Mac. And it says it is the best choice if you have 10,000 or more photos.
Ah, open source camera control.
It has a duplicate finder. It has a face detection and face recognition. So, for example, if you tag a face in one picture as being Drew, it'll find all the pictures that have Drew in them.
Is it DIGIKAM?
Yes.
Okay. Got it. Let me pull that one up, share this one. Dynamic open source digital asset manager and image editor. Organize your collections. Okay, I'm going to have to look into this one and review it and let you know what I think at a future meeting. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to share on this topic of how they organize their data?
Yeah, just ask a question, Drew, on the program that you're just describing or any of these others. From the point of view of organizing, so Ken said he had 10,000 photos in Sanford as well. Is the idea that you use this to search for something, and when it finds 50 of them, you do a copy and move to a new directory? Or is it your thought that every time in the future you want to see them, you'll search again for them?
I personally have not used DigiKam yet, so I can't tell you what it does.
Yeah.
But I can, in Google Photos, find a picture of my sister and identify that picture and label it with the name Lisa, and it will, Google Photos will scan all of my photos and find the pictures that have that face in it. And then I can take all of those and put them in a album called Lisa. So that way I have them all together.
Yeah, my thought was to organize them and put them in folders by subject and by date.
Okay. And that's a great technique.
But using the optical recognition, using an app that has OCR, well, not OCR, optical face recognition, OFR.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment on this subject? If not, we'll go on to our next one. The next thing I had on here was 3D printed file sources, if you had a 3D printer. I don't know if there's an interest in this group for me to expand on this topic at all, but I do have a list of places that if you ever had an interest in delving into 3D printers, but you didn't have any idea of what you could do with it, I'll put this in the chat, these links, if I did not, where'd it go? Chat.
Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, our library in Joliet has a center for doing things like 3D printing and making T-shirts and stuff. I haven't had a chance to avail myself of using that, but I intend to at some point here.
Which furthers this conversation on this or reinforces it. Because if you go to one of these sites, all these files that are on here are all free. You can just sort through and look for based off of topics. And maybe there's something that you decide you want to print. You copy the SLT file, and that's what you would send to your local library if they have a 3D printer. Be forewarned that most libraries that have this equipment, they charge for some aspect of usage of these printers, whether it's materials or what. And it may not be as cheap as you think, but they're trying to offset the cost of the equipment.
Yeah, ours is materials.
Right. The one by me, I think they're charging 50 cents a gram, which is pretty steep when you start adding up how many grams it's going to take to print something. You could print something that could be 400 grams. Well, that's going to rack up the bucks pretty quick. And I believe most of these files that you get here will tell you how much plastic is going to be used or how much it's going to weigh at the very end. So you could kind of calculate out the cost of this. My local library, which I did recently found out, has a very nice new bamboo printer that probably sits idle 98% of the time. And it's kind of neat to know that. I called them up and asked them, I said, how do I do this? They said, you just send us the files, use your library card, and we'll let you know what it costs when you come pick it up. Pretty simple. Now, you may go, well, I don't, if this would be a reason that you don't need to buy one, is your library can do it for you. So you may say, well, why do I need to worry about 3D printing? Because you have a product that broke and a piece broke on it, and it's a little plastic piece, and you could find that piece on one of these websites and have it fixed and repaired in no time and be able to use it. My son's used it to repair a door, a hinge on his microwave. The door hinge broke or something like that, or a handle. Very simple to use. So I gave there in a link a bunch of the locations. I recommend at some point you take a look and see what is in there. There is a ton of stuff available that you can print. You just, besides little toys and helmets and things like that, you can get a lot of parts, whether it's for your snow blower or, oh, sorry, Drew, you don't use those things. Your leaf blower, your weed whacker, you maybe need something to hang it on the wall. There's brackets for doing that. All kinds of good stuff that are listed on those sites. So check it out. That was the one topic that I had. Anyone want to comment on 3D printing? Nope. Okay. The next thing I had is a utility called BleachBit. And what BleachBit does is it's how to free up Windows disk space and shred sensitive data. You can opt to delete the cache, cookies, history, passwords, and other data from your web browsers or backup files, histories, logs, and Windows Defender. So what is BleachBit? I will share that screen. Okay, so this is BleachBit. I don't know, has anyone ever heard of this software?
I used it for more than 10 years on Windows, and I originally found out about it from my early years in Linux.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's a
Tim?
Linux native cleanup utility, and they have ported a version of it to Windows.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I use this every week
Yeah.
to delete Windows temporary files.
Now, for a lot of systems, you may have two versions of BleachBit. One is for the administrator's account, one is for a standard account. And this is even true in Linux as well. The administrator account usually only gets opened up occasionally. And your standard account should be your daily login account, whether it's Windows or Linux. And they both have separation, but they have data that accumulates garbage and temporary files, files that are special use for one purpose, and then it's not used anymore, but they don't delete it. And this also applies to updates as well. So you have to set up a dual situation where when you launch BleachBit, you're either launching it as an administrator, and if necessary, given an administrator's password, and it cleans up all the administrator's stuff and the operating system. And for the other one, it's a non-administrator, in which you are taking and only cleaning up each standard account on whatever OS you have. So with me, it's only two accounts, a standard account and an administrator. But if I had a family and had a couple kids, I might have the wife on a separate account and each of the children on separate accounts. So I would have to go into each one of the standard accounts to be able to clean them up periodically. And I don't have to go into the administrator's account to run BleachBit there. I can run that from my standard account and just type in my password for the administrator, and it all gets cleaned up.
There are, in any operating system, two distinct levels of garbage accumulation. One is system-wide, and that's where your administrator is doing things. The other is per user. In Windows, that'd be the app data folders, more than anything else. But Windows is uniquely afflicted by accumulating massive quantities of garbage in locations most users normally do not access.
Right.
I ran into, in my Intel NUC, the July security update, it would not install, and it had an error code of 0x087 something, which means a parameter was out of bounds. That thing would not install no matter what I did, standalone, anything. Here's what I found out. I had to fix system-wide file corruption in the usual ways with SFC scan now and the other one that begins with a D. But anyway, it's the one that has the restore health.
DSM.
DSM. There are three levels of There are actually 4 levels of DISM, which have to be run. And there's a DISM way of cleaning up the component store, which is otherwise known as WinSXS. That's the Windows component store. It accumulates garbage. Why is there a component store? That is because you want to move inside the kernel resources, get duplicated outside of the kernel to protect the kernel against malware. And that is part of what is in Windows 11 called core isolation. And so this results in old programs and old versions of programs leaving behind a lot of stuff in the component store. So I had to clean that out. But I also had to clean out the software distribution folders of Windows Update. 18 gigabytes had accumulated in there.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it was old garbage.
Right.
Yeah.
And Windows is
One site-
renowned for this.
So
Once
as
I
you guys
cleaned
see,
all
I have the application up here
Yeah.
running.
Yeah. Yeah. Sanford, scroll down to System, and then click on Temporary Files.
yeah,
System.
Click only on Temporary Files, and click on that little box to the right of it,
Okay.
and then click on Preview at the top.
Yeah, preview.
This will tell you how many megabytes or gigabytes. Disk space to be recovered, 2.11 gigs.
2 gig is pretty typical of just the temporary files.
That's
That
pretty
doesn't-
small.
That does not get into the component store, and it does not get into software
So
distribution.
this is a safe place to clean this stuff up.
Yeah.
right?
What I had to do was much more aggressive, and it's a little riskier. If you overclean the component store, you won't be able to uninstall programs. And if you overclean the software distribution folder, it has to rebuild, and that can take a lot of time, and it has to re-download everything. But that was the only way I got that security update to go in that
Mhm.
NUC. That NUC is a legacy system, which has been around since Windows 10, and it had been upgraded, and it had accumulated a lot of stuff. I've cleaned all this stuff up before, maybe 6 months ago, when I had a similar issue. And it just keeps coming back. 16,
Yeah.
18, 20 gigabytes.
Yeah, Sanford,
Yeah.
you haven't set yours up yet. And I can
Yeah.
show a setup as far as that goes.
Sure. Okay. Here, I'll stop sharing mine. And what is the difference from this BleachBit versus like PC Manager?
There are similarities, but one is made by Microsoft that is a manager of existing utilities that may go back as far as Windows XP. And they clean up a lot of their Microsoft stuff, but it is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And Bob was bringing that up. Bob and I are more advanced. We get into the command line tool, and it allows us to clean up areas that most people have never cleaned up anything in because they don't know how to access it. They don't want to do anything in the terminal because they don't feel like it's something they understand. They're nervous about it and are afraid they're going to create a disaster.
And it is
justifiably
very easy. It is very easy to create a disaster when you go into these system areas.
That's right.
When you have to do a deep cleanup. I was being guided by AI as I went through this. I used Gemini AI in Google search, and I refined and refined and refined what I was looking into until it finally got down to something that unlocked that messed up parameter or whatever it was. And finally the update went through, and that was where I stopped because I didn't want to do any further damage.
So,
Oh.
Tim, you have a lot of boxes checked. If you ran preview at this time, to the right of those check boxes, is it going to display the files, the amount of data that can be recovered, or what that folder?
Yeah,
It'll have numbers. It'll have numbers.
It'll have numbers. Okay.
absolutely, per one. But the thing is, BleachBit, once you set up something that's got check marks like I've got here, it retains it. It's like memory.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
now, if I want to, I can change any of these at any time. But
Yeah.
for a newbie, the one nice thing is, here's backup files. This, when I clicked on the one here, it tells me here what are backup files. These are delete the backup files that were created by the Windows backup utility. Caches, cookies, what are these things? there's all kinds of them. Now, one thing I want to point out, I don't have Vim. Vim is an old text editor that was used in Linux. It's still used by a heck of a lot of Linux users. But I find it too arcane, and there are other text editors that are much simpler to use, much quicker to use. So I never have those two set. I also am in my browsers. This is Firefox browser, okay? I use recovery of or restoration of my previous session with the browser. So I always have that unchecked. Other people, they always want a blank browser to come up. They would have this check mark to get rid of anything that was remaining in the system as a session file. Then you have site data. Now, this one's controversial, but site data includes indexes, local storage, and other things. Sometimes this is good to get rid of. Sometimes it's not. It's something you've got to somewhat experiment with because it's based upon how you use that piece of software. Okay? When you add a new browser in, if I added a new browser to this computer right now, it would not show up in BleachBit. I have to do a little manipulation to get it to show up in my BleachBit. Google Chrome, I'm getting rid of it on a lot of my systems, so I can eventually get rid of Google Chrome, but I keep it available right now because I want to make certain the system is getting rid of stuff. Here's the AI. That's something that's fairly new. I never bothered to put a check mark in there to get rid of any leftovers from the use of AI inside of Chrome. So that's important. Crash reports. Sometimes crash reports are good if you got to call up tech support for the particular application, but in many cases, it's just garbage. You can put a check mark in here and it'll get rid of the crash reports every time you run BleachBit, etc. So you have your browsers in here, you have the system, the clipboard. Custom, I don't, this is if you have specific folders which might accumulate junk in them, you can put a check mark in here and tell it what custom folders you want to have cleaned out in addition. Empty space. I refrain from doing empty space simply because it is very, very time consuming. It's taking any writable available space on your system and writing ones and zeros over it so nothing is recoverable in those areas. DNS cache. Sometimes that's good to clear out. Other times it is something that has to be rebuilt, and it might slow you down a little bit. It depends on you, the user, how you are using your system as to whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Windows Defender, a little bit of cleanup there. Windows Explorer, more cleanup there. And then you have, if you still have WordPad on your system, I do, I have a little cleanup there as well. Even Zoom application has some cleanup. And this one that I'm brought up here, this is for the administrator's account. Even though I am not in the administrator's login, I am in my standard login. But when I launched it, it asked for my administrator password. I typed it in. That's all it's going to deal with. System-wide administrator cleanup. If I chose the one with no sign-in, that would only clean up my standard login account and nothing else. So if I have multiple standard accounts, either for some strange reason I have it, or I have a family and we have multiple people using the computer, I got to go into each one of their accounts in order to do cleanup on their accounts. So this is, it's a good utility, but you have to understand as much as you can about each one that you check off, because in some cases you can be getting rid of information you don't want to get rid of. So you have to investigate this stuff real carefully first before you do it, or you learn the hard way by losing information you didn't want to lose, and people have done that. One other piece of advice, a strong one. Either do BleachBit before you do a system update, or do the system update, make sure you reboot the system, and then do a BleachBit cleanup after the fact. Because bottom line, if you do a system update and you then immediately do the BleachBit, stuff that you were just installing could disappear very, very easily. But it'll be treated as junk.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah. Yeah, very good overview, Tim.
Very, very good overview.
Yeah, I love that program. That program is a good alternative to using CCleaner.
Thank you. I knew there was another one out there.
Yeah, CCleaner has got a new version. I don't know if it's the same guy running that or not, but there is a new version of CCleaner that's come out this year. He had problems about 2020 to 2023 that was causing some big problems with users, and they started leaving in droves. Then I saw nothing for CCleaner for a long time, and just this year it's got a whole new complete setup. I haven't looked at it yet, but it is available.
I use the new CCleaner. It is owned by Avast, the antivirus people.
Yep.
And for a while, they were removing features from the user interface. And this was causing huge uproars. In the last year or so, they've brought back a lot of those features. The granularity of cookies and things like that is back, but it's harder to find than it used to be.
Well,
CCleaner points up something about cleanup. CCleaner, you must run not only as administrator for system-wide cleanup, but also per account as user cleanup, user data.
That's very true too. But here's the other thing. Avast, AVG, they're both owned by Norton Utilities, which makes Norton AV package. And that apparently is now under the LifeLock, because LifeLock was a partner with Norton originally, and apparently they decided to take over that. So even CCleaner now is under the same umbrella as LifeLock and Norton Utilities.
Yeah, but you don't have to buy the ups and extras. The free version still does what it does. It just looks a whole lot different.
Yes.
And I checked off a whole bunch of stuff, and there are some things that cannot be cleaned.
Yes.
There are some things that will come right back. Same thing's true with PC Manager. There's about 12 megabytes of stuff that you can clean and clean and clean it, it'll always come back. And this is true of recent documents. It's true often of thumbnails. So you might just as well not clean those
Yeah.
because they're going to come back.
The main thing with CCleaner that a lot of people didn't know because they don't look at what they really have on their system to begin with, that they put there or somebody else put there for them. And that is, you got to go under the settings and look at all the options. Some of those I used to custom tailor. I haven't looked at the current version as yet, so I don't know what changes there are in that area. So it can change the characteristic of what it does and or what you don't want it to do that might cause you big problems. And that's the bigger key.
Yeah, that's true whether you're talking about CCleaner, PC Manager, Glare Utilities, or what. And have we talked this horse to death?
Yeah, well, no, but I want to move on to one more thing
Well,
because we're running out of time here.
I
But
want
Tim,
to mention one additional thing. There is
Yes.
another competing product to CCleaner called Fluent Cleaner. FLU, I think it's ENT Cleaner. And that's something you might want to look at, especially if you were a CCleaner user. It might be worth at least looking at. But look at settings again or preferences.
thank you. The one more topic that I had, and I thought we most of us know all this stuff, but I thought I would just throw this out here. If you're having slowdowns in your system on the boot up, you can run these scenarios here. You can run SFC scan now or DIM DISM and the following things that I have on here for restore health, start component cleanup, and image cleanup. Does anyone want to expand on these briefly?
Well, I'll tell you right now, the DISM line 2, excuse me. It has startup components. There's an additional feature, but use it cautiously. And what it is you put a blank space after that P, put a slash, and then put reset base. This will get rid of any backup versions of drivers, which also accumulate quite a bit of space.
Like this?
Only do
reset
this
base?
if your system is running good and solid.
As in, and I typed that in. Is that what you look on the screen? Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
Reset base?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right.
All right. What does that do exactly? Repeat that.
Now, you don't have to use that parameter reset base, okay? Especially if you just updated a bunch of drivers on your system, whether it's through Windows Update or some third-party utility. I wouldn't do the reset base right away. I would wait maybe a week. Check out that everything seems to really be working fine with the new drivers. Then run the same statement again with the reset base. And any backup drivers that allow you to roll back to the previous driver will disappear, saving you extra space.
I want to tell everybody DISM will often hang at about 62.3% if you're doing it online. What it's doing is it's reaching out to Microsoft Update and grabbing fresh copies of some of the files. This process may take a long time, so just let it run for up to 2 hours. It may take that long, and then it'll begin to progress again. I
Another,
found that out during my cleanup of this update this Windows update that wouldn't install.
of the,
And DISM online means it's actually going to go live and download the files from Microsoft, which means it's subjected
If
to
it needs
your internet speed.
if it needs them, yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is.
Now,
The other thing,
If you're on a DSL,
now the
well, if you have DSL, you should be using a local source, which was a Windows ISO.
okay.
now
and-
the first line of DSM, a little bit quicker than doing the restore first, is you can replace the word restore with a /check health. That just determines whether you've got a problem that it may be able to address. The other one is a /scan health. This one, if it finds something, it will correct it, but at the same time too, it's lightning fast compared to restore. Restore is for major problems that would overwhelm scan disk.
So you said
Yeah.
the second one you said besides
Scan-
restore, replace it with what?
Scan health,
Jack Health.
scan health, or check health.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, and
Capital S, capital H.
you don't.
capital S, capital
It doesn't. It works fine without the capitals. Some commands though do require capitalization of certain letters to make certain that they do work correctly.
And then
The other one?
Check health.
check.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can do any of those.
Yeah, and they're all good tools. However, Scan Now, it's taking the last image it had of all your installation and comparing it against the current installation. Therefore, it's going to have mismatches. It's going to have problems. So the best thing to do, if you really think you got a problem, do a check health or a scan health first. If it looks real bad, do a restore health. Then do the SF scan now. That will compare the final result with the current version of the installation. But only Restore Health gives it a new image for SFC to work correctly. Usually that can be, people do that a little backwards.
Yeah. And like I say, this is the only cure that worked on my particular issue. And I also did have to empty out the software distribution because apparently there were corrupt downloads.
Okay.
So you can clean up the Windows update components as well.
Yeah, they're very good tools. The bad part is they're command line. And probably 98% of people will not touch those with a 10-foot pole, fearing that God will strike them dead.
But our users in this group may be more inclined to. With this, I'm going to conclude our meeting and stop the recording and say